Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. It is April 9th, I have this date incorrect here, 2008, and we are at Porto Novelli in New York City, and I want to thank Joyce Hergenhan for coming down from Connecticut and away from the golf course on a beautiful day to just spend a little time with us and talking about her career and her thoughts on public relations. So why don't we start out looking at your early career. Now you received a Bachelor of Arts from Syracuse, and then eventually an MBA from Columbia, which was about 15 years after that. You worked as a journalist for Gannett newspapers and as the press secretary and speechwriter for U.S. Representative Ogden Reed. Can you describe your experience working in these varied fields and how that prepared you for your career at Consolidated Edison?
When I was in high school and college, all I wanted to be when I grew up was a print journalist. I loved writing, I loved reading, I loved the world around me. And so at Syracuse, I had a dual major in political science and newspaper. And I was editor of the college daily newspaper there. And I figured I wanted to go start a career at the Associated Press, which was a good place to start a career as a print journalist. So they were interviewing on campus, and I went to the interview. And the first thing the man said to me was, "I don't know why I'm wasting my time talking with you. I've never hired a woman, and I never will." And in 1963, it was perfectly legal for him to say that. And of course, I spent the next 10 minutes trying to convince him he was wrong, but to no avail. So I went back to work that summer at the paper that I'd worked for in northern Westchester the previous summer. And I was there for about a year. I covered, it was a big deal. I mean, I was 21 years old, and I was covering, town government and politics, and it was kind of fun. And then I went to work for a congressman, for Ogden Reed, and I did that for 4 years. And then he recruited me. I'd covered him a few times. He recruited me. Then Gannett papers in Westchester County were always trying to convince me to come back, And after 4 years of working for the congressman, I was getting married, and I didn't want to be commuting back and forth. So I did go to Gannett, and I was at Gannett for 4 years, and I covered politics, government, a lot of business. There was no real business news people at Gannett back then, so I feel that I covered a lot of business. And I wound up covering Con Ed during some rather tumultuous times at Con Ed, and they recruited me for a job. So I went to work there as a manager of public information, and within a few years I was vice president and senior vice president of public affairs, and here in Manhattan. And it was a crazy, wild time. And my favorite Con Ed story, if I may digress,
yes,
is that in July of 1977 was the Great Blackout. And I was the assistant vice president for public affairs at the time. My boss, the vice president, was in Israel. And so I was acting vice president. I was also going through a divorce. I was going to school full-time at Columbia. And it was just so much going on in my life. And I had just moved from my house into a one-room sublet apartment on the 29th floor at Columbus Avenue and 66th Street. And at 9:30 at night, I just walked in the door. I'd been in a study group with my pals, Joan Freilich and Emily Marks, my two friends from Columbia Business School. Just walked in the apartment, took off my clothes, and the lights went out. Well, up until the previous Saturday, 4 days earlier, I lived all of my life in the suburbs. The lights always went out. Car hits pole, lights go out. Branch hits wires, lights go out. This is the middle of Manhattan, and the lights go out. And I looked out the window, and sure enough, all of Manhattan was dark. So I called the Con Edison Energy Control Center, which ironically was 2 blocks away. It was at West End and 66th. And guy answered the phone. I said, "Hi, John." I said, "This is Joyce. I'm here in Manhattan. There's no electricity. What happened?" And he said, "We lost the system." And I said, "Oh." I said, how'd that happen? And he said, well, we lost some lines to lightning, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, fine, I'll be right over to the control center. Just make sure security keeps all the media out on the sidewalk, and I'll be right there. So I quickly got dressed and ran down 29 flights of stairs, actually, which put me in the basement because I forgot no building has a 13th floor. So then I ran up a flight of stairs. I got out onto the street. Of course, it was dark, it was chaos, and horns were honking. And I mean, it was just unbelievable. And all of a sudden, I realized that in my haste to get dressed, I'd put on a pair of jeans and a magenta tie-dyed T-shirt with a frog with a butterfly on its nose. Okay, off goes the Con Ed spokeswoman, just like some lost hippie. So I get over to the Energy Control Center, and I go upstairs, and I get a quick briefing as to what happened. And so I go down to the sidewalk where there's throngs of media, as you can imagine. I mean, and of course, here we were in Manhattan, which was totally blacked out, and those new Trump buildings on the other side of West End had not been built yet. So you had a clear view of New Jersey. And of course, what is New Jersey? It's all lit up. And here we are in Manhattan, and it's all dark. Terrible placement to be standing, I have to tell you. So anyhow, I explained, what had happened. That it was all, it had been 100 degrees for like 10 days in a row at that time. I mean, the city was just baking. It was so hot and humid. And we were importing a lot of power from upstate New York and from Canada on these big transmission lines. And there was a horrible thunder and lightning storm up in Dutchess County, and it took out two of these big transmission lines. And that put the system into total overbalance because there was more of a draw on it than it had energy coming into it. And so in order that it didn't blow up, it shut itself down. Okay, short version. Anyhow, so I go through all this and I explain all this to these reporters. And this one guy keeps giving me a bad time. He says, it's lightning. You mean to tell me that the Con Ed can't design against lightning? I said, Con Ed uses the most up-to-date, advanced things there are, but lightning, lightning's an act of God. You can't always, prepare for an act of God. Okay. 2 days later, Village Voice comes out. Con Ed blames God for blackout. I should have brought it with me. It's a great headline. Con Ed blames God for blackout. So that was my enduring contribution to Con Ed. And Charles Luce, who was the CEO then of Con Ed, the longtime CEO, died about a month ago, from today actually, 2 months, end of January. And in his obituary, his family asked me to write an obituary, which I did, but of course the Times is going to do their own thing of it. And so in the obituary, they had poor Chuck saying act of God, and it wasn't, he never said it, it was I. So, but then we're going back, and that's how the coverage was so frantic during those 24 hours that the city was without power. Anyhow, that's my Con Ed story. I wanted to save that for posterity someplace. Anyhow, so I was there, and I was really enjoying Con Ed. And I was a senior vice president, and I was thought I'd be there. I loved living in Manhattan. By that time, I'd moved out of the one-room sublet, and I had a nice condo, co-op actually, nice co-op on East 79th Street, and thought I'd spend the rest of my life there. And one cold winter's day, I got a phone call from a search firm guy named John Johnson from a firm called LaMaille Associates, and he had a position that he thought I might be, a candidate for. And could we have dinner? So, talk about it. He wouldn't tell me the name of the company, but he told me enough that I figured out that it was probably GE. And so we had dinner, and didn't hear anything for, a month or so. So I figured, he's not interested. I don't care. I'm not that. He also confirmed that it was GE at dinner. And so, but then a month or so later, I hear from him again, apologized for taking so long, but they wanted me to go up to Fairfield, Connecticut, to meet with a guy named Frank Doyle, who was the then senior vice president for corporate relations at GE. And fine. So I get, so I tell Con Ed that I'm taking the day off, because I'm having dental surgery. I was having so much dental surgery at the time. It was very plausible that I was having dental surgery. And so I took the day off, and the night before going up there, I broke my toe. And I, and I don't know whether you've ever had a broken toe, but they hurt, and you can't wear shoes. There's nothing to treat a broken toe. It just is going to eventually heal itself, and you just try to wear shoes that you can get on your feet. And in my case, I had to use something I already owned because I had to leave for Connecticut very early the next morning. I did not have the luxury of going shopping to buy things. So I had an old ratty pair of beat-up sneakers, and it was the only thing I could get on my poor foot with the broken toe. So I show up at Frank Doyle's office, and I think I said, "Hi, I'm Joyce Hergenhan. Nice to meet you. I don't always wear sneakers, but I broke my toe, and they're the only shoes that I could get on my foot." I said it all like in one word. I was so mortified that I was walking into his office wearing sneakers. I'm sure he wouldn't have noticed. Moral of the story, don't obsess about things like the fact that you're wearing the wrong shoes. Look at me. I mean, I'm wearing flip-flops. They're comfortable. That's what I do. So anyhow, so I met Frank, and then another month went by. I didn't hear, and then I had to go back. And then I had to go and meet the vice chairman, John Burlingame. So again, I went up to Connecticut. I met the vice chairman, John Burlingame. We had a very pleasant meeting. Again, I said I had a dental situation, and so then a month passes again, and I hear that I'm everybody's candidate for this job, but I have to meet Jack Welch. Okay, but Jack Welch wasn't famous as Jack Welch then. Jack Welch had just become CEO. And Jack Welch was just the punk kid who had replaced the great Reg Jones, because obviously I did a lot of research on this subject. Pre-internet, I might add, I had to use the old Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. Anyhow, he wasn't Jack Welch. He was, this kid who replaced Reg. So anyhow, we're having. So I said to the headhunter, I said, I really can't take another day off to go to Connecticut. He says, no. He says, Jack will come into the city. He'd have lunch with you. So we're having lunch. And I walk into the restaurant, which was La Perigord Park. And Jack was already there, so we shake hands, sit down. Hi, hi. Okay. He pulls out, he has an envelope. And he pulls out some paper from an envelope. And he says to me, it says here that you are a sports trivia expert, are you? And I said, Jack, that search guy talked to everybody I've known since I was 4 years old. I have no idea what's in there. He says, come on, are you a sports trivia expert or not? So what do you do? I said, okay, try me. So he said, who played second base for the 1946 Boston Red Sox? And I said, Bobby Doerr. And he said, but who held the ball? And I said, you mean who held the ball when Enos Slaughter scored from first base on a single to win the 1946 World Series for the Cardinals against the Red Sox? He said, what else would I mean? I said, Johnny Pesky. And he said, oh, that was too easy. Let's talk about something else. That was the beginning of my job interview with Jack Welch. That's how it started. And the reason why he did that was that GE did not have a woman officer, had never had a woman officer, and had never hired an officer from the outside. All their people had grown up within the company and gone through their training programs and moved from Fort Wayne to Cincinnati to Schenectady to Lynn, the usual GE way. But they've never brought in an officer from the outside, much less a woman. And he figured, and it was a very much of a locker room, macho kind of place. And he figured that a woman who knew something about sports would be less different. And so we had a good interview. And then I got offered the job. But then I couldn't decide whether to take it because I loved living in Manhattan. And I was working for a CEO who didn't much care about the public affairs aspect of the job at that point. I had a new CEO. His name was Arthur Halsberg. And he was an engineer, and he didn't care about going to parties at Gracie Mansion or doing all this stuff that kind of went with the territory. And so I was enjoying that, and I figured, growing up to, suburbia, where everyone kind of comes two by two as a divorced woman, this might not be fun. But so I agonized over it for like a week. And finally I was told, okay, make up your mind. We have to know on Monday morning. So that Sunday afternoon, I was with my friend of mine, and we were watching I was agonizing with him all afternoon. We'd gone bicycle riding, and then we'd gone back to my apartment. No, actually, we were in a bar, I think. We were in a bar, and I was still agonizing over what to do. And the U.S. Open golf tournament was on this TV in the bar. And it was when Jack Nicklaus was in the clubhouse with a one-stroke lead, and Tom Watson was on the 18th hole, 17th. 17th green, or approaching 17th green. But he hit the ball into a bunker, and all the announcers said that he has to play this safe. He just has to chip it up a little bit and play it safe. Otherwise, he runs a horrible risk of hitting it way over the green. And so what does he do? He goes for it. And it went into the cup. And it's one of the most famous shots in the history of golf. And that happened as I was sitting there agonizing. I said, okay, that's my omen. He went for it. I'm going to go for it. And that's how I decided to go there. It was because Tom Watson hit a ball into the cup. Anyhow, so that is how I wound up at GE.
Wow.
So my life has been fun. In case you're not getting the point. So.
Let me ask you something that wasn't necessarily in here, but so this is a time of crisis for you. Did GE have a code of ethics or any mission statements or anything to follow?
Yeah. I don't know whether there was one before I joined the company. I was not aware of one when I came. But early on, Jack said, we need to do this, what we believe in, who we are, what we believe in. And rather than having, some person like me sit down and write something, it was kind of thrown open to all kinds of groups at all levels to come up with ideas. And then there was something developed by a huge, consensus, and then it was circulated to a whole lot of other people. So it was a thing that had a lot of parents, and it was organic. It wasn't something that was foisted from above. And so, and I think it had a lot more value being done that way. I mean,
And it was something that, did it get pulled out sometimes in times of crisis?
Absolutely. We had business cards with them on. And, the thought was that, it'd be nice if everybody carried one in their wallets. And a lot of people did. A lot of people did it. Because I could remember being in staff meetings, and one of my guys would pull it out and say, well, while we're doing this, we should think of this, which I thought was always very interesting.